Michael, have you named the mannequin behind you?
Yeah, Jenny.
Jenny. Hey, Jenny.
It was not my purchase. Came with the house.
One normally hopes for a washing machine and a dryer, not a mannequin. I actually hate mannequins. You know that? I feel like...
Do they remind you of your own obstinate humanoid indifference?
No, they remind me of people, and it terrifies me. Like I find that if I'm in the presence of a mannequin, I feel like I'm in the presence of the other, you know, really terrifying. And my great uncle was a mannequin. Had several mannequins in this room where I eventually would where we would sleep if we were staying with him. And like, you'd always have to turn, I knew they'd be in there, and you'd go up in the dark and you'd see their fucking form. Then you turn the light on, there they were. And I don't know. It always terrified me. So there's something about them. Their very lifelessness is terrifying.
How we doing, fellas?
Good. Jake,
how you doing?
In the wild. Hey man, I'm all right. It's good to be back.
Today we're working with a different crew. It's Michael, Jake, and me, Peter. We're without Will.
But I think we'll be better for it.
Yeah, hopefully someone else can speak for a change.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Will's a Deleuzian now.
Yeah, he's joined an even worse podcast.
Last time I talked to him, he was like really into Nick Land, and I don't know. I haven't spoken to him in a long time since then.
Yeah,
but it's the three of us, and we are talking about for they don't know what they do.
Yeah, but slow your jets down, Will Jacob.
Sorry.
You haven't been around for a little while.
That's right. How does this work again? We do about half an hour of intro.
Well, we gotta
5 minutes of talking about
a few false starts, and then get going.
We gotta get the vibe, Jake.
Yeah,
that's right. Vibe is crucial.
Did you guys you know the fabric, like the knit fabric, mohair? I until 2 nights ago thought it was mole hair. And that they literally made like a sweater out of mole hair, only to learn that it was from a goat, apparently.
I think I assumed it was from a mole.
But it's M-O-H, it's mohair.
It's M-O hair.
A mohair. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's not a mole in sight.
No.
That word.
I was used to wearing cotton, which of course is the tuft of a rabbit's tail, but it was quite a shock and an embarrassing one at that.
Moles actually like both have a negative and a positive connotation when you got a mole on the inside, right? Moles are the tunneling, that's underground creatures that having being a mole can be a good thing, right?
Well, depending on what side you're on.
I mean, if you're Claudia Schiffer, Will is a good thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Or Enrique Iglesias. Huge thing for him.
Famous mole guy?
Yeah, huge mole.
Famous small penis guy too. Did you know about that? No.
A small penis.
Yeah. A small penis. Have you seen this? I say this because I was only recently made privy to the fact that like for a certain period of time, Enrique Iglesias, like during his live shows, sort of pathologically admitted to having a small penis, like couldn't help himself and like needed for people to know that. And so like there are several clips of him online, like at live shows, playing in front of like tens of thousands of people being like, I have a small penis.
Maybe he just wants to avoid the flocks of fans trying to lust after him.
Well, I think the point is that like they still love him despite, and that's the message of today's podcast, from 3 small penis podcast hosts. This is Jacob.
Well,
this is Jacob from Žižek and so on. And I have my own admission to make.
I'm glad we got some mileage out of that mohair because I swear people say mole hair.
I think they say mole hair.
No, because there's mole skin.
Is this like a fucking like Berenstein bear thing? You know, like
it's mohair and there's mole skin.
Moleskine?
Moleskine, I thought. Sorry, that's the
Jake.
Moleskine is the notebooks.
Jake, just because you
Moleskine's gun.
No, it's Moleskine. It's Moleskine.
It's Moleskine.
It's skein. There's a fucking it's I.
Okay, Jake, is it foreskin or foreskin?
It's not moleskin. It's not SKIN. It's SKIEN.
No, it's KINE.
KINE. Oh, really?
I'm Googling.
Moleskine.
So it's Moleskine.
Did I say moleskine?
Yeah.
Moleskin. I guess it's a moleskin. Fine. But there's moleskin clothing, is there not?
Not that I'm aware of. Pete's the fabric guy.
Am I?
Yeah.
No, what I'm scared of with this well, this may be candor. This may be too candid. So, but when I haven't been at the reading group, I'm like, wow, there are many ways to reading and interpreting Žižek. And it's not as though it's not like I'm missing something, or maybe, I mean, I know that I'm missing a lot, but like, wow, you can go really technical with Žižek if you prefer, if you'd like.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm touched up, you know, I'm touched up. I'm not raw when it comes to Žižek. And I think there's like a whole raw universe out there. So we're doing an episode on what we are ultimately doing, you know, doing a reading group on as well. Mm-hmm. Same book. And so how are we going to do it differently? Jake, back with the hard hitting questions.
I don't think we're going to know until we do it.
Yeah.
Really, but
retroactively.
Yeah. But yeah, just put a pin in the conversation. Yeah. We're doing a discussion on For They Know Not What They Do, which we're doing a reading group on with Dr. Matthew Flisfeder. If you want to join that, join our Patreon.
But that being said, there, you know, the turnout was great. And a lot of people, man, a lot of smart people listen to our podcast. It was intimidating.
Yeah.
But not that intimidating. We're still here because we're still here.
We got a shitload of emails from people. Thank you for reaching out.
Oh, nice. What can you, without names,
can you dox a few people for us?
Well, like what sorts of questions were they asking?
What is the difference between Žižek and Todd's definition of the master signifier? Why does Žižek seem to conflate the master signifier and the point de capiton?
Which we've gotten into before. I heard Russ Briglia and Todd get into it about Moby Dick, and they seem to have a somewhat similar conversation that we did about it. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a hazy, given that it's a matter of language. I think in terms of like the structure of the way that we speak or write, maybe that's a question to be asked.
We'll have to ask Todd.
But I think maybe for some sentences, Todd, for example, Todd, what is master signifier? Yeah, I'm not sure. I think this is kind of what we settled on. Like,
right. It's like, what's this forced distinction?
This is what it was the Jaws conversation, I believe. Yeah.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the quilting point is a part of the operation of the master signifier.
You know, that sounds pretty good to me, Michael. Sounds pretty good.
Well, okay, but the master signifier quilts, but the point de capiton to me would be the noun version of the quilting. No, point de capiton and the master signifier to me are the same thing.
But like, yeah, the master signifier does something other than just give like structure meaning. The fact that it's like the structuring meaning, like there can be a quilting point that's not, I think, like the fundamental structuring principle.
No, I think you're right. I think like a master signifier can quilt, but a quilting point doesn't necessarily isn't necessarily a master signifier.
Yeah,
like there's a quilting point in a dream, for example, that think
it's the fucking blanket you're under.
The literal quilting point. Yeah, that I don't think necessarily has to be like a master signifier in relation to like the symbolic order, or again that I feel like, I wonder if we've like if the master signifier operates structurally and the quilting point can be more personalized, individualistic.
Certainly, say for example in love, there is like a kind of personal quilting point in one's own like experience of love,
right? An event.
Yeah, I think that can't be about like everyone's experience, because love is an exception.
That's cool.
That's nice. Yeah, that's nice.
Or whatever. Let me open this baby up. Firsty says for Kostya, my son. I actually didn't know that was his son's name.
I didn't know how to pronounce it.
Focaccia.
I just
Sorry, that's so stupid. Okay, right.
Michael,
let Pete handle it, Jay.
You want to briefly introduce the book a little bit?
Yeah, probably. What do I know about the book? For They Know Not What They Do was released in 1991, a follow-up to Žižek's breakthrough in English with The Sublime Object of Ideology. It's basically the summation of a series of public lectures that he did following the publication of Sublime Object. He took it on the road, which is basically been his MO from the get-go. Whatever he's working on, he takes around the world and
kind of workshops it. Yeah. Yeah.
Like a fucking touring comic.
Yeah. And there is like, you can see some of Sublime Object in here, at least, a good amount of it. But also what's more interesting is you can see his like greater project, even that he's working on now in here as well. Like I was surprised to see him use the word, for instance, or the phrase short circuit, and basically in the same way that he means it now.
Yeah. And things like perspectival shifts. Mm-hmm. We see some like proto examples of the parallax.
Yep.
And this is the more like Hegelian focused text.
Right. And he does his Žižek thing where he got some Monty Python in there.
What sort of announces that shift from Sublime Object to this book that sort of makes this more of a Hegelian project than a Lacanian one?
Then, yeah, because on the surface, it seems Lacanian with enjoyment and all that. The subheading being enjoyment as a political factor.
Yeah. So he says that the book elaborates the contours of a Lacanian theory of ideology, moving step by step via ever new detours toward its main object, the status of enjoyment in ideological discourse, delaying this encounter in the same way as one delays the climactic reunion with a lady in courtly love. So sexy stuff from the Z-Man.
And I guess there's something about the way that he moves from Lacan and Lacan's like understanding of semiotics and language to, and this was Matt's point, but like to get a fuller grasp of the way that the dialectic functions for Hegel and how that dialectic actually, because of this kind of Lacanian supplement, functions differently than Marx's dialectic, right? And For They Know Not What They Do is ultimately a Marx reference, correct?
Yeah, Marx and Christianity,
right? And it's interesting that classic Žižek, it's like there's always this like Marxist banner that is by way of Lacan and Hegel so much different than Marx meant it.
Yeah, I mean, like for instance, early on in the book, and this doesn't really play into the structure of his argument, but he makes a kind of passing comment about Marxist alienation and the way that approaching it. Let me find the passage.
This is the story of Peter Pan. You can read along with me in your book. You will know it is time to turn the page when you hear the chimes ring like this.
What is at stake here is the very notion of alienation in Marx. The moment the invertedness is redoubled, the moment the inversion attests the invertedness of the normal state itself, the very standard by means of which we measure alienation is called into question. So like what he's doing here is not only like trying to analyze how, say, politics or alienation, what that bears on our experience, but also how the supposed movement or confusion that alienation causes, what is that compared to? What is the supposed normal function of things that our economic or political system is alienating us from. That is also something to be considered, because it's not enough to just say, and this is the point with ideology, is like, it's not merely the clouding of our vision, but also how our vision itself is already constituted through ideology.
Right. And that the structure of reality is in some way always already ideological, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like what normal functioning of things are we comparing our analysis to? Yeah. Is the very side of ideology itself. And we see it all the time, like say your politics, say we have the midterm elections coming up, or like inflation, our experience now compared to the imagined normal functioning of things that is without contradiction and to which we should return.
Yeah, because it gets set up as some kind of comparison, right? Like a standard from which it's being compared.
Yeah.
But that invertedness already encapsulates for something to be inverted. So he uses the example of Gulliver's Travels, where like horses ride men, etc. Right. And that kind of caricature or satire shows us that the very normalcy of what we consider to be the default itself shares this inverted character.
Right. And for the inversion to have any sort of bearing, it already has to be latent in the first thing itself.
So that inversion has to do with the way we enjoy, right? With enjoyment as something of a political nature or political category, right?
Yeah. Well, he doesn't go too far into like the enjoyment as political factor early on, but I think
right. We're only doing the first chapter today, by the way, everyone. So, well, Michael, it felt like when you were talking about Gulliver and the inversion and the presence of the inversion already in the norms, like,
and also within our very subjectivity.
Implications. Right. It has implications for reality as such, subjectivity as such, and of course our relation to it through enjoyment.
Yeah. So I think you can pursue that idea, Jake, with the Monty Python example that he has with the headmaster and his wife having sex in the classroom. So keeping in mind that idea of the inversion, the point of prohibition contains within it this obscene demand to enjoy. So prohibition and transgression share this mirroring. And the idea is that which gets experienced as transgression is the inverted form of prohibition enjoyed.
Right. So in Monty Python, there's the boys in the classroom. And he didn't mention this, but it's to his point that when the sketch starts, before the teacher walks in, all the students are sitting quietly. And then the teacher walks in and they start throwing things at each other as if they're performing transgression for the gaze of authority.
Yeah.
And when it's just themselves and they don't feel compelled to do it. So the teacher walks in and he begins the lesson, tells them all to shut up, and he begins the lesson and starts doing sex education, where he actually brings his wife into the room and they start having sex. And he's just describing in a very technical way how it works for the students. And they're all like, just like a regular class, they're all like really bored. They're looking out the window. And John Cleese is like, hey, what is
there something that's what's so interesting out there, right?
Yeah. But it's funny because like it's commenting simultaneously on the way that like this is more mundane, but like are educated. Like there's, no matter what the subject is, the form of the education is the effect that sort of effect on us. But more to Žižek's point, like the transgressive act, sex, is rendered mundane because of the lesson itself.
Yeah. So like what's normally considered like a site of transgression or taboo, right? Like sex for a kid in high school, it's still like a giggly thing, right?
Yeah.
But what sustains it as a prohibition is the function of the headmaster, the name of the father.
Yeah. The idea that it is a transgression.
Yeah.
Once it enters the accepted functioning of the classroom, then it becomes another like
thing.
Boring subject. Yeah.
Right. And
it's like how weed is no longer transgressive. Like everyone and their mom literally smokes weed. it's also funny to see people like still trying to retain the kind of like badass.
Yeah, it's counterculture
weed
status.
Yeah, it's like, no, literally everyone does it.
Yeah.
Although because exactly. Yeah. Nothing quite like seeing somebody walk out to, where smokers are, for example, like who are smoking cigarettes, and somebody lights up a joint, and it's like this, what used to be sort of juxtaposed is no longer. Yeah. It doesn't have this kind of uniqueness or supremacy.
It's mundane now. And honestly, cigarettes have kind of taken the place that weed used to have, because it's the thing that's now, it's not as condoned by the state as marijuana is.
Like Clint Burnham was talking about how comic books was seen as a kind of transgressive form of enjoyment. Mm-hmm. And then when it gets taken in by academia and taught in schools, the enjoyment has been taken away because it's no longer
and now comic books are just as stupid as they've always been.
Yeah.
Well, there's something about John Cleese's position where it's like, what could be so interesting outside, to the student looking out of the window. It's like, it's almost as if, why is this no longer interesting? Or why is this not intriguing you? Why is this not something that you're interested in? And I think
you're supposed to find this. Yeah.
Now that's subtext, and I'm definitely
but you can imagine it, right? Like if the headmaster was standing outside of the room in the view of the window,
fucking his wife,
the children would want to stare at the blackboard.
Right. Well, no. So I was thinking of, the normal structure would be, imagine if it was an economics lecture, but outside somebody was fucking their wife. Of course, that would demand the attention, right? Mm-hmm. But in this case, we have the exact opposite.
Yeah, someone was giving an economics lecture outside, then they all want to go to the
Sure. Well, and then that says something about the way that, so it's the structure of enjoyment is either like we're being, the super egoic, imperative to enjoy, or we are enjoying. It's, our enjoyment is structured by a prohibition, right? It's
exactly. Well, I think those are the
taboo,
and it's the same thing, right? Because like the super ego sets the taboo and prohibition, and it's enjoyable because of that.
Right. And so in this case, in this skit, what we're seeing is like what happens when the taboo becomes named, right? When it's too,
tamed rather.
Tamed or named. Yeah. But isn't it tamed
when it's no longer
name,
prohibited?
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's no longer prohibited, but would you say that by having it in this skit as like part of the lecture, is it still an injunction to enjoy, or is it that it's taking away the injunction?
I think there's the injunction. Yeah. But maybe it's the fact that it's directly said rather than implied, because so much of the law is like unsaid yet implied.
And this is an extension, but how like we've heard there have been these like, I can't reference them actually evidentially, but there's been reports that like Gen Zs, for example, are having the least amount of sex of any generation of any of all time. Mm-hmm. And it's because sex is so accessible, right? It's that sex is around every
and
corner for
and them. Also porn, like must have something to do with that. But like
for sure,
like when you were talking about Michael earlier about, I actually forget what you were saying, but what.
Yeah, like,
but what I was thinking about when you were talking about it, when you were droning on about some shit I don't care about, I was thinking that when I was a kid in the schoolyard, another kid would like have porn, like a printout or like a ripped page from a magazine, and it was
so
like
fucking old Peter is.
And everyone was looking at it like it was this like I'm still young.
A pinup girl. This is in the trenches of World War fucking II. And
well,
he's looking at pinup girls.
It was just harder to access, naked images, and as such, it was so much more of a valuable, mysterious object. We'd all stand around and like look at this ripped out page from a magazine. And now, like, obviously you can sit in class and watch porn on your phone. And I'm sure that happens.
All the way back to poor Wittgenstein having to jerk off to mats in the trenches.
Yeah.
Poor bastard. What is the sexiest to me? I think the division sign is definitely the sexiest of the, things you can find on a calculator.
1, 3, 5.
Oh,
boobies. 8. 008 135.
There you go.
Did you guys do that one at school where one person would put their hand like that?
Mm-hmm.
God, this podcast, that's when we need video because who knows what fucking hand signal you just made. But I think everyone probably does know, which is kind of cool, actually. So back to what we were talking about with the simultaneity of the prohibition and the imperative to enjoy in the superego, is that has a lot to do with the quilting point and the master signifier that we were talking about earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, they structured around the law or like the rules or whatever, and which obviously has a kind of structuring principle to it.
And this is where Žižek asks, why does the absence of law universalize prohibition?
Yes, love that.
And the answer
exactly as a way for it.
Please.
Enjoyment itself. So what we experience as transgression is something that gets imposed or ordered on us as an injunction, the call of the superego to enjoy.
Right. So that call is actually what sustains our enjoyment.
Yeah. The obscene underside to a prohibition is the demand for you to enjoy. It's the kind of like compulsion to transgress the prohibition. It's already packed within it.
And I mean, we've talked about it before, but an obvious Žižekian example is in They Live when Don Nada is wearing the sunglasses for Nada is wearing his sunglasses for the first time, and he's seeing the underlying meaning of the ads around him. You know, like what are some of them? Like obey. Yeah, this is your God.
Well, there's a question that precedes why is the absence of the law universalized the rule of prohibition? The question that precedes it is, if something is already forbidden, why is it necessary to prohibit it in the first place?
Right.
It's just really, quite frankly, I'm not entirely sure. That one makes my head spin.
Well, it's reminiscent of the paradox of the prohibition of incest, right? Yeah. So on the one hand, like in Freud's time, there was a denial of sexuality of children. And so if there isn't childhood sexuality, then why the need to go on to prohibit it, right? And then I suppose it runs with Žižek's example of the unanalyzable Slovene.
Okay, Jake, I thought of the way to connect with what Michael said before I derailed the conversation with what Michael was saying and what you were about to say is the double reflection thing. The imaginary and the symbolic as a double reflection and what that means ideologically speaking.
That there's something about enjoyment that requires or is the function of an imaginary relationship with our objet, our relationship with desire is then converted into the symbolic in a dialectical move. That has something to do with enjoyment and ideology. Yeah, well, here's a good passage from Žižek. He says, in this precise sense, the criticism of ideology consists in unmasking traditional allegory as an optical illusion, concealing the mechanism of modern allegory. The figure of the Jew as an allegory of evil conceals the fact that it represents, within the space of ideological narration, the pure immanence of the textual operation that quilts it. The real questions, however, are, how is this purely formal inversion possible? On what does it rely? More precisely, how is it possible that the result of a purely formal inversion acquires enough substantially to be perceived as flesh and blood personality? The psychoanalytic answer is, of course, enjoyment. How does the clouding of our perception and also our symbolic world itself, that inversion, this ideological manipulation of our experience and also of our very notions or concepts of ourselves, how does that switch take place? And for Žižek and psychoanalysis, it's enjoyment. But you were also asking, Jake, I think, how within that operation, how do we move from the symbolic to the imaginary, right?
Yeah, the way I was thinking about it is that the relationship between the imaginary and the symbolic isn't of two different levels or external entities. It's the specific dimension of the symbolic emerges from the imaginary mirroring. So there's a point of double reflection at which the imaginary is hooked on the symbolic. So what does it mean, right? It means that the normal state of things, of which the other is an inversion, is already an inverted state by definition. So
to exist at all.
To exist at all.
Yeah.
So for the imaginary, is itself already related to the symbolic and vice versa. So the topsy-turvy world as an inversion is always a case of two, the invertedness of our allegedly normal world.
Yeah, the topsy to the turvy. Briefly, what came to mind for me reading this is actually quite close to Sartre's description of self-consciousness and the imaginary, in that self-consciousness is a double reflection of consciousness being aware that it's conscious. So there's a direct experience of the redoubling of the awareness of that experience. And then the imaginary is the third layer on which we project our self-consciousness onto the world.
Right. So like anyway, for Hegel, would that be you have the move from self-consciousness to consciousness of consciousness?
I think that would match.
So like, and I think that there's a constitutive relationship between the imaginary and the symbolic here that has to do with subjectivity and enjoyment. That's got me really kind of like, I don't know what to say quite yet, but I know that there's something, at least that was talked about in the reading group, which is about that we ourselves posit the prohibition. How do we get beyond that deadlock? Right, that you're talking about, that you guys have been talking about, the deadlock of the inversion, right? Is that a simple acknowledgement of the inversion is not necessarily enough. From a critical stance, but also from I think a subjective stance is like, once we are exposed to that deadlock, to the inversion and to the double, the double.
Is it a deadlock though? I wonder.
Well, it certainly fucks up my, I'm like, well, how am I supposed to enjoy?
Right.
Right. Like if my relationship, I was actually watching Gilmore Girls last night, and which is just an absolute banger of a show. But
is it?
I really do relate to Lorelai. But Lorelai's talking about, she discovers that like part of the reason why she enjoys what she enjoys is because her mother forbade it. And she starts to go through this kind of psychotic moment where she wants to embrace only what her mother approves of, or like she's like, do I only enjoy what I enjoy because it was prohibited? And so she starts to kind of have this inverse relationship where she's like, what I'll do instead is try and take up what my mother, doesn't prohibit and see if I enjoy it, or like, so she kind of has this psychotic breakdown, right? This sort of subjective destitution where she realizes her enjoyment is basically, hinged upon a pretty frail symbolic register of what is an imaginary identification. And so she, this comes down to like, she's like, I don't even know if I like Pop-Tarts. Right. And I think like, because her mother forbade Pop-Tarts in the house. And that to me, like I've gone through that very process, right? It's like trying to think about why it is I enjoy what I enjoy, coming down to, oh my God, my desire is a desire for the other. And that's it. Yeah. Right. Is that what does that mean? Especially if this conversation is going to head, maybe in future weeks into like the political, how this is situated politically, realizing that we posit the initial prohibition, that we take it up and then identify it. And it has this kind of dialectic. Here we go. I don't want to lose either you, myself, or the audience in words, but like this dialectic between the symbolic and the imaginary can be resituated by the election of another signifier, a new master signifier. There's my kettle. But I think that's what
you're gonna have to pick that baby up.
I know. Well, it's worse than my breathing, eh?
It's all right. My cat's like vomiting on the floor at the same time.
You know what I do with those whistling pots? I just leave it unclosed, so it's gonna boil, and you can pick it up at your leisure.
This is what my very smart roommate does. And I actually one time, her and I have a very, I'm sure you can hear everything right now. Sorry. But her and I have a very like understanding relationship. We don't have to talk very much about things. But the one thing I've had to talk to her about, I was like, listen, put the lid on the kettle or you're going to burn the fucking house down. And I've realized there's nothing more in this world I hate than a fucking whistling kettle. I fucking hate whistling.
It's the worst sound. And the moment it boils, you have to run out of the room. But like, I don't know, when I'm boiling water in one of those things, I can still hear it. I can still hear it boiling in the next room. So
you could just get an electric kettle like a normal person.
No. You can't. Yeah. Enjoy your fucking PVC or whatever that chemical, the plastic is in this.
Jake, that's your surplus enjoyment in suffering through an old fashioned kettle. At least you're not consuming microplastics. And then I'm sure you get it. You like the next second you like drink from a plastic water bottle or something.
Yeah, no, what I do instead is buy a metal kettle from Walmart, which is definitely not better in any fucking way. Yeah. Exactly. And it was made for about 4 cents and I'm buying it for $40. Anyway. Yeah. I'm not a saint, and I do, for they know not what they do. I feel like it's like, oh, that's the title of the book we're reading, right?
Yeah. It's funny how like you like hate this whistling pot, and you're like, at least you like run to the next room, think of yourself like, at least I don't have a plastic one.
That's right. I mean, fucking electric kettle. Those are no fun. It's no fun.
I think they're better.
I will say, do yourself a favor. Next time you're watching pretty much any movie that you like, you'll probably hear a fucking whistling kettle. If it's a movie with tension, talk about the universal symbol for tension. That and phone.
Also, yeah, I was going to say a ringing telephone, which is in some ways why new movies aren't as good as older ones. And also the tension caused by a character, like, miscommunications or like someone not getting information in time gets solved by cell phones.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
Anyway, just not the same. Hold on. Okay, I heard what you said. So being the subject of the prohibition, but we've been talking today about what happens when that prohibition changes,
and you're still a subject of the changed prohibition, right? Like for example, we are subjects of ideology, and it's not to say that all of humanity has only ever been subjects of a particular ideology, but within culture, within society, within, the functioning of the way humans act in the world, we are subjects of ideology, one that can change.
Right. But so it's like you're saying that there's something about the symbolic ego ideal, right? The sort of the way that the imaginary folds into the symbolic. And we have this like identification with the prohibition of the big other, right? That's this quilting point that there's tension there because there's a possibility that relationship and its tenuousness can, either through the occurrence of an event or the emergence of a new signifier or through the psychoanalytic process, can be completely unraveled to the point where your subjectivity is laid bare. And
I guess there can be an impasse if you view yourself as a subject merely through those objective categories. And then, just like you were saying with the Gilmore Girls, where it can lead to this kind of break where you realize that, okay, am I only a subject in relation to the things that I shouldn't enjoy? Can there be such thing as finding a source of my own enjoyment? Maybe that's where he's going with this book, where one's enjoyment, and this is actually where Todd goes in Capitalist Desire, where enjoyment can be kind of refitted as a to political ends through the subjective enjoyment, right?
Or a rejection of the non-choice, right? The sort of like I would prefer not to in this stance is I think also powerful, because to realize that you are only existing, as a reflection of the virtual gaze of the other, or that your desire is only the desire of the other. Like once that realization happens there, the idea is that you can't just start creating your own enjoyment, I don't think.
Yeah, and does the realization really change anything? Because of course, for Žižek, it doesn't, right? I mean, his formulation of ideology is they know what they're doing and they're doing it anyway.
Despite, right? It's the subjective destitution does not actually presuppose a kind of authentic, and I know that my language is going to sneakily become Heideggerian here, but like a kind of authentic taking up of one's own new ideological coordinates.
And of course,
desire.
Yeah. And of course, this is the problem with that very silly, soup protest, where the idea was that now that we realize that we should talk about the environment because they threw soup on Van Gogh, then things will change. We all know that there's a problem, but we behave as if there isn't one.
That's right. Yeah,
so
Žižek
what really gets solved?
That's right. Yeah. It's not a lack of awareness or knowledge of a problem, nor is it a lack of solutions.
Exactly. Because to even be, materialist, Marxist about it, the problem isn't the awareness of the environmental catastrophe. It's the structural, economic, and political incentives against it.
Yeah. Do you think that we could link this to the emperor's clothes? Is there something so in Žižek's example of the emperor's new clothes, there's something of this catastrophe that's supposed to occur, when people see that the emperor is walking around naked. So isn't there something to this example where when the soup can is thrown on the painting, it's supposed to be this reveal, this like opening of the catastrophe, where instead, of course, it continues the same.
Yeah, I mean, like this will be forgotten very soon.
Well, that's an interesting point, right? Is that the reassumption of the default. It's that the second clause is that we act despite, right? Is that we know what we do, but we do it despite is much more operative than like the first clause is, yes, the ideological illusion, but the acting despite is the more important thing.
Yeah, and that's
something futile about transgression, right?
Sure.
Is that like transgression is rendered futile by the smooth functioning of the system. To be able to incorporate these things and then find out that they're funded by oil people or that it's protected by glass is like there are all these unique ways of being like, well, this transgression really wasn't. It was just more about their own enjoyment, and it wasn't about like.
That's a good point.
Disrupting the way things work.
Yeah, and also even on their terms,
exercise and enjoyment.
If all we needed to do was know about it, then an inconvenient truth would have changed the world.
Right. Well, it's kind of interesting, right? Because the original ending to Anderson's tale was that the subjects admired his invisible clothes. And it was when it was at the printing press that he changed it.
That's cool.
So if the story did end with them admiring his invisible clothes, you see the continuation of that particular formation, right? Whereas instead, this is supposed to be this grand reveal.
Right, and it's not enough. The point is that it's not enough, right? Is that there's something about the negation of the negation is not enough to necessarily disrupt the function of a master signifier, the quilting point, and how it structures our desire, right? Is like, that's what I think I'm trying to get at. And I do need your help here, boys.
Well, like the book is towards that consideration. In this precise sense, negation of the negation designates the self-relating negativity, the moment when the external negative relationship between law and crime turns into law's internal self-negation, when law appears as the sole true transgression. The negation of negation is what we're talking about, like where the prohibition becomes part of the law itself. And the law is its prohibition. But
the law is its own prohibition.
Yeah.
Like as in it sort of sets in motion. Okay. The law prohibits itself is what we're saying here?
Well, I don't know. Personally, considerations of the law don't really interest me a whole lot.
Well, like that in a certain way, the law determines how it's going to be broken, right? Like that there's a relationship between law and what it kind of prohibits that prohibits itself from being.
Well, that's right. I mean, like law's sort of presupposed foundation is a crime. It obscures that history.
And basically what he's covering in this chapter is the various points at which we're finding enjoyment being operative within the law, within the subject, within the master signifier. He's kind of moving through this mess of signifiers, spends time talking about like how can the signifier represent another signifier in its absence slack as the subject.
Well, the prohibition only exists. What's funny is like, okay, we're talking about law and prohibition and like, isn't it because it's covering up for a lack in the symbolic structure itself, right? That the reason why we elect a prohibition is that there's not anything that guarantees our enjoyment, right? The prohibition covers up that there's a fundamental lack that is the condition of our enjoyment, and that it attaches itself metonymically to like in the world and it's organized. The metonymic attachment is organized by whatever a given master signifier is at that time, or the prohibition or the law, whatever the fuck. An awareness of that lack is supposed to change our relationship to prohibition. No. If we can see that the prohibition stands only in front of or to obscure the lack from which it originates, what happens when we become aware of that?
Yeah.
But so to resist the prohibition in a way only instantiates the original lack, right? Because we talked about the doubling nature of enjoyment and its prohibition, that simultaneously, because our enjoyment it happens in two ways. It's either the imperative of the super ego to enjoy, or it's the prohibition. Like those are one and the same, no? Flip side of the same coin. Okay. Jacob's guys.
No, yeah. Well, you're talking about void. You're talking about lack. Žižek writes, subject is this void, this lack in the series of the predicates of the universal substance. It is the nothing implied in the substance's tautological self-relationship. And I think the self-relationship we're talking about is that double reflection we're talking about. And also how that via that process, the subject represents a signifier for another subject. So yeah, basically how the subject is subject through this symbolic chain of the law.
But mirroring. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's also, like you were saying, a kind of void within it. Maybe the inability for language to fully represent meaning, right? Or because of the
impossibility to enjoy, right?
Completeness, full enjoyment. And that is also subjectivity. The subject is the nothing implied in substance's tautological self-relationship. That's a Hegelian twist on it. The subject is the void in the kind of void within substance.
Mm-hmm. I like this, when you're a kid, the tautology of law is like your parents say, do as I say, not as I do. They're like, it's the because I said so of the law. So like with Jake's Gilmore girl, there's a certain point where like you can imagine in the narrative, Jake, that the daughter finds the mother eating the Pop-Tart in the house. And so there's this moment of like, oh, well, the figure of authority is already transgressing her own law. Law is contradictory or hypocritical, right? And that doesn't change the dynamic that they have between mother and daughter at this moment of hypocrisy. It strengthens the prohibition because it now reinforces the enjoyment of the taboo. Mm-hmm. That's just for Jake.
The enjoyment of the taboo being what ultimately justifies that process.
Yeah.
Of the prohibition of the law. Yeah. Okay, fellas, I think, we, if not summed it up, then we certainly had a conversation about the chapter. Any other thoughts? No, Jacob?
I want to get back. I want to do it again. Well, not the episode, but I want to do it again. Whatever it is, I want to do it again. Right now? Yeah, I want to do it again. I want to do it. I want to do this again with you guys. And I want to make sure that we don't leave this text behind because I right.
Here's Žižek and so on. We're a no text left behind podcast.
Well, can you tell me what actually is happening next up? We've got, so the reading group is bi-weekly. I like that because it's like aftercare. We get it.
It's like the touch up on the Zoom that Jake uses. Okay, so
I can't believe I admitted that.
Okay,
I can't believe fellas, I admitted
that. See you later. Till next time. Bye. See ya.
Bye. A very breathy goodbye. Bye. This is normally when I'd hang up. I was so close to just being
Wait, Jake.
I was so close to hang up.
Stop.
Thank you.